Our next speaker is Vida Williams, an innovation advocate who is determined that innovation cannot leave humanity behind. Vida utilizes her experience as a data scientist to drive social and economic change in communities. A promising start as a tech writer spurred a nearly 20-year career with data technology and innovation, spanning several industries including energy, healthcare, and education. In 2013, she co-founded a small social enterprise consulting firm, Axis Partners, Inc., where they serve mission-driven organizations in the areas of data architecture, process engineering, and data sciences. Recently, her endeavors as an adjunct professor at VCU's Da Vinci Center has led her to be named as the school's first ever innovator in residence. Vida remains active in her community through board memberships with Code Virginia, Podium, and Virginia Union University's Center for Undergraduate Research. Please welcome Vida.
I guess I can officially say good afternoon, and I apologize that I am the hurdle between you and lunch. So I will promise to keep this as brief as possible, as much as possible, because I did write it for the 20-minute slide, but I'll try to get it to 10 to 15. Will they still get an hour? Okay. I want to thank Amelia for inviting me here. It's always been kind of an interest of mine to be more engaged in the Atlanta data community. I know that there are a plethora of things that you guys are participating in and doing and being a vanguard in, and us up in Richmond kind of look down at Atlanta going, can we play too? So I'm just throwing that out there, like I'm willing to be down here more. Anyway, my talk today is about the fact that data is rarely neutral. And we actually, there we go. And we have an opportunity as practitioners to get on the front side of what that means. I think very often we think about data, especially from a practitioner's perspective, just as numbers or just as a picture that we can now look at and do something with, or natural language processing. Like, that has been what data has become. And I think that we've maybe lost the spirit of what data was supposed to be. So I entered into data around 1995. I will go ahead and age all of me. Because what was interesting about that time is that was the very first time we started really getting international data protection legislation from an international perspective. And that indicated that we really felt strongly that at some point this was going to be a critical question that we were going to have to wrestle with. And we fast forward to today, and I think we're still wrestling with what it is that we are doing and what we're doing with it. For me, that epiphanal moment of understanding the nature of data came relatively early in my particular career, because my first project out of college was a big data transformation project. It was transforming the EPA data into its relational form because, Larry Ellison was riding around on his yacht telling all of us that's where we had to go. I don't know today that we would have necessarily taken mainframe big data and put it into little relational models, but we did. And it just so happens that I realized in that moment that what we were really doing is knitting together human stories. That is actually what we were doing. We're trying to figure out how this element of data is related to another element of data in order to tell the story. And the story for me was in Tom's River, where they had dumped toxins into the water that resulted in several cases of cancer in my particular family. And I was able to hone in on that at a very young age in the industry of data because I understood that we were not just looking at elements, that we were not just taking numbers and putting them together, but that we were actually painting the picture of people's lives, their infrastructures, and their relationship both to themselves and to their environment. Now, what is interesting is we right now occupy that space. We sit between the people who entrust their deepest thoughts and their caloric intake to us, and the people that want to know how they're doing that. And so I liken it to very similarly or the metaphor I like to use, especially in the world of lakes and swamps, is data has become ubiquitous as air is relatively ubiquitous, we hope, because we're breathing. But the quality of air in LA is drastically different than the quality of air in, I don't know, Utah. And we won't understand the dire effects of the toxicity of that air quality until we're already sick. And I think that's where we are with data. Data is so entirely ubiquitous that we are just collecting it and we are just putting it in places in hopes that we're going to figure out what we're going to do with it one day. And we haven't figured out that some of the practices that we have against that data is causing that data to become very toxic. And we stand as practitioners in that gap today. And while we get really, really, really excited about the new tool sets and the automation and machine learning and neural nets, to be honest, what we forgot was the basic law of algebra, which is tested. You have your equation, you get your answer, and man, your middle school teacher, I hope your middle school teacher told you to put that answer back in that equation to make sure the equation still works. We forget to take the answer to our models and put it not back against the model, but back against our people. Everybody kind of with me? We skip that step. And instead, what we have turned into is human managers. What we do is we decide to make people move in the most efficient and most profitable way that the last person to write us a check decided that they were going to move. And that is pretty dangerous. And here's why it's dangerous. And this is a silly example, but it irritates the heck out of me. How many people in here use Gmail? Okay, so y'all have seen this. You can relate to it. All right, so look, have you realized recently that your relationship with Google got real intimate and it started finishing your sentences? Like, I don't know you like that. Especially because you left out all my y'alls and I declares, and I am a happy Southerner. And people rely on that in me when I'm composing my emails. Not to mention, I have an amazing vocabulary riddled with 10-letter words and 4-letter words, a lot of 4-letter words. But what Google has decided my language cadence was going to be is 4th grade vanilla American English. Man, do I even strike you as being 4th grade vanilla American anything? And so it irritates me that instead of getting to know me and being intimate with me, they want to finish my sentences based on the huge swath of American language today. And I find that a bit offensive. And I find that they did that algorithm and they didn't test it against anybody. They didn't test it against the Northerners. They definitely didn't test it against the Midwesterners. And Lord knows, we don't, that whole West Coast language cadence, if you're over here, we don't even know, like. But that's what natural language processing magic is supposed to do for us, right? And so what I have found, or what I think is happening, is that we're doubling down on some systemic biases because we don't test the answer back into our algorithms the way we think we should. But it's not just in the math, it's in our relationship with the stakeholders who are asking us to cull through the data. I think we need to hold our relationship to the stakeholders with a little bit more accountability. And it comes with actually just forming the very basic questions of why do you want to know this and for what probable outcome? If you've ever asked your data sponsor why they want to know that information and what they intend to do with it, I bet you that's a charged conversation. Because what they want to do is say, hey, we have all this data, give me some insights. Well, what do you want to insight about? I don't know, just like the thing. Well, what thing? What do you want to do with it? How do you want to use it? How are you describing the people that you want to do that to? Because nobody's asking us for data to sit innocuously with zero effect, right? The effect is called their return on investing in our procedures. So they want an effect on what it is that we are doing, and we are doing it because we're excited and geeky and nerdy, and we can, and it's the best art form ever today. But we got to pause for a second and really just ask each one of our stakeholders, why do you want that, and for what probable outcome? What do you want to gain from that? And the reason why that becomes very important is because, and this is my call for not action, but accountability. We sat and we watched and are still watching the data wrangling in the 2016 election. We sat and we watched the circus that was the Senate hearings around Mark Zuckerberg and the attachment and the consequence of dealing with social media data. And then we look at the people, all of you, and I've seen half of you on social media even just today, like, you're not participating, so you're just going to shut it down. Like, all of America is using social media, but we want to ask Mark Zuckerberg to be responsible for something that we are actively doing as citizenry. So there's no check and balance, there's no legislation. And I think at some point in time, most of us who are in this space are going to have to mature our career to really thinking about the legislation of the use cases in data. Because at the end of the day, and I go back to my initial premise, what we're doing, what we're accountable for, are the stories that people are telling us about the lives that they are leading. They are not just meant to be managed. So what do? This is my tactical call to action, because again, I'm trying to get you guys to lunch. The first thing that we have to consider, and I'm going from the bottom and around, is data bias. When we are selecting data, when we are selecting people and their actions to tell us what they do, I think we've forgotten a couple of things about people. One, people's behavior is not driven by normalization. It is driven by the compelling outlier. Think about that. We evolve not by looking the same at everybody and doing the same things that everybody does. That's peer pressure. We evolve by being compelled by the outlier. But our practice in data is to normalize it at the expense of the compelling outlier. So that's the first thing I would ask you, to kind of look more deeply at your outlier. Could the outlier that you're seeing in your data not be a distraction from the efficiency of getting to the end algorithm, but instead, could it be a different way to consider the data set that you're culling through? Are there more like that outlier? Two, we don't know who we are. So how can we determine who goes in which data sets? When we're dealing now with gender fluidity, ethnic everything, being interracial, finally I can say that, I don't have to be binary. When you're talking about sexual fluidity, how are you determining what goes into what data and what could be transformed into a good data set? And the one that irritates me were those early algorithms to determine beauty that forgot to put dark people in it. And so in that moment, that is a crashing together, a merging of a personal bias and a systemic bias that resulted in a very offensive algorithm that really made people feel horrible about how we perceive beauty, because to the general public who's acting on it, they don't have the nuance and the understanding of the algorithm to know that somebody actually did that is not representational of how we actually perceive it. Do you see the difference there? And that is where we need to start. After that why and for what outcome, our call to action is ensuring that the data that we are pulling together to write these algorithms is truly representative of whatever population we have determined that is going to meet that outcome and that why for the stakeholder that is asking for us. And that is true even of citizen data. Goal bias. Goal bias, to me, is very closely associated with that why. It should inform that data bias or that data set that you're getting. What is the goal that you're trying to achieve? Are you really trying to figure out what the native language of American English really is in the North American continent so that you can really truly help predict what that next sentence is going to be, so you can be intimate and finish my sentences like, I'm okay. Me and GPS tells me everything. Me and Google don't rock like that just yet. So we will, as a people, accept help, if you will, convenience. We will. We've been proving it. We're doing it every day. But you've got to demonstrate acumen and intimacy, and the goal structure is where that happens. And what I often tell my mentees who come to me, they go, oh, I want to do what you do. What you do is so exciting. Like, they don't know that you really sit there like this for a long time. But the outcome, the presentation, right, that seems really exciting. And and I always ask them, what are you majoring in? And they're like, math and more math and some like higher level math. And I'm like, take a social science. Because it's not context that we're interested in. It's the interaction between the human element and the context that gives us the ultimate answer. And if you haven't spent time studying people, then you're never going to see that negative space in the data that you pull together, or the fact that the goal is not related to the data that you've selected. Next is feature bias. And this one is actually my favorite, because I do think that data science is an art form. I do think we're artists at heart. I do think that we really get off on telling the story of people. That's why we keep evolving the technology to help us tell that story more efficiently. But it's in the feature set that we choose the colors, the stroke. It is how we're defining and deciding who those people are that we're representing. It is in feature engineering that we have determined who we're crafting, who we're sculpting, where they live, and what they are affected by. And we give it the least amount of attention because we're trying to just use the basics that we know that are currently available in that column set in order to get through the algorithm as quickly as possible to a probable answer with the 95% probability that it was right. But man, feature engineering is where the artistry happens. More concretely, when your stakeholder, especially in marketing, is asking you to determine what the buying patterns of your people are, how you define those features is exactly how that company that you're supporting defines its clients or its customer base. And if you miss that, you've missed the question. So I think the most exciting innovations that I can forecast, while yes, it's going to be in the automation, it's going to be in the tech, but it's going to be how we approach this quagmire of feature engineering. And lastly is model bias. I know we get paid really well, on average, to get these models out the door as quickly as possible with the probable right answers. I need to know who's going to be responsible for the models that fail, especially in those automated black boxes. I'm an advocate for them. Let's use everything we have at our disposal as we try to push this whole industry of data forward. But we need to ask ourselves who's accountable for that. Is it the original designer of the model? Is it the person who asked for the model? Is it the person who is going to legislate based on the outcome of the model? Who is actually taking the stand and defending the model choice that was used, especially when you can't clarify it? So as we're really excited about using these models, it is here too that we are missing the greater story of who we're going to become. Because we, the people, and we're part of us, because we use the data as much as we give the data away, knowing how it's being used. It is here that we are crafting what our tomorrow society is going to be. And I think we need to take that very seriously. I think we need to take it as though it's a great mission. And one of the examples that I use for this, and the reason why I have the Avengers, is because Thanos was very, very much a let the math do what the math does kind of data person. He really was. He was like, listen, we have a sustainability problem. We just need to go ahead and get rid of half. That's a math do the math thing. That's neutral. That is an adherence, a spiritual adherence to neutrality of data. And all of us left that theater crying, especially when Spider-Man, like that was, if you didn't see it, I'm sorry. Truly. But I'm also not mad because like it's been some time. But Thanos was that data practitioner that let the math do the math with zero thought process on the implication of what that world was going to be like. And the people who had to deal with the consequences of let that math be the math was not, in short order, me, who cried for an hour after watching that movie, but also the world that was created because of that. And that's where we are today. The world that we will build, we are all advocates sitting here for artificial intelligences, and you can't say that you're not because you're in this industry. But do you know who we're crafting in that space? Have we held our businesses that we're supporting accountable for who they are seeking to manage and call human tomorrow, even if calling them human is their customer? And so this is what I'm sending you out to lunch to think about. Like, who are we as we craft tomorrow? What are we telling, what story are we telling, and how are we fashioning that ecosystem for our kids? Because that is actually what we do every day, in between coding and Python. That is what we do every day. So, I think I hit lunchtime good. I am around for lunch. I would love to have a rigorous conversation with you. If this is at all interesting, please find me. And thank you again for hosting me in Atlanta. I love being here. Have a great lunch.